Hey guys, tonight we begin with the Forgotten City. Whispers of Copan, a place once at the heart of a mighty civilization now buried under thick jungle and lost memories. You might find yourself wandering the overgrown trails of the Guatemalan highlands in the year 1576, where ancient stones begin to emerge from the earth, carved with gods who stare back at you with silent knowing eyes. But don't worry, you're not alone. I'm here to tell the story, and you only need to listen. Before we begin, tell me where you are and what time it is. There's something magical about people from all over the world gathering in this one quiet moment. Now then, turn off the lights, let the fan hum gently, put on your headphones. In a few seconds, your screen will slowly fade to black. Not because anything's wrong, but because blue light at night interferes with melatonin, the key hormone that helps your mind settle into sleep. A little darkness will help your brain understand it's time to rest. And now let us begin. You are deep in the highlands of Guatemala, a place where the jungle is more than trees. It's a beast swallowing you with every step. There are no roads here, only blade-sharp vines, roots coiled like tentacles, and a suffocating darkness that clings to every breath. You feel sweat breaking across your neck and spine, not just from the sweltering rot of ancient vegetation, but from the eerie silence. No birds, no wind, only the whisper of your sword slashing through underbrush, and sometimes your own strained breath pressing against the damp air. You are Diego Garcia de Palacio, soldier, magistrate, explorer. You lead a caravan through a place the locals call the land of many trees. Every step forward feels like a trespass. You don't know what lies ahead, but something deep in your bones tells you this land does not welcome you. It feels like something is watching, not from ahead, but from below, from the damp earth, from the dense canopy above where the light never reaches. You wonder, are the demons from old tales truly watching? Then you see it. A shape protruding from the forest floor, covered in moss and roots. Not just a rock, something crafted. You kneel. Your hand touches a cold, perfect edge. Your heart slows. Others in your group have seen it too. One murmurs, then another whispers, rising like smoke. It's not a stone, it's architecture, a trace of someone, of something long gone. You look up, and for the first time you see them stone figures as tall as men, carved with faces not found in any holy book. They're creatures that neither bless nor curse. They stare with empty eyes, lips twisted in what might be mockery or a warning. A shiver crawls down your spine. Not from wind. From the voice inside your head whispering the first question, who built this place? And more chilling, why did they vanish? Palacio had read the reports, tales of cities consumed in the fire of conquest, of Spanish settlements built atop pagan foundations. He had seen the rising cathedral in Merida, its stones pulled from ancient temples, and the sprawling capital to the north carved from what was once sacred land. But none of it compared to this. What he now stood before was something else entirely. It wasn't just the size, it was the silence. These ruins weren't conquered, they were forgotten, and yet they still whispered, as was expected of men in his station. Palacio documented everything, each twisted root, every broken idol. He wrote to the King of Spain, describing what he had seen. That letter, dated March 8th, 1576, spoke of a city that once held great power and sophistication, civilized, even advanced in the arts. The very stones bore proof figures carved with skill that defied the simplicity once ascribed to the native people of this land. He described statues, 8 of them, depicting men and women in postures both regal and terrifying. He recorded terraces and a great plaza that reminded him of Rome's Colosseum. How? He asked. Could such refinement have come from those deemed rude by European standards? But none among the people he questioned would explain. Not fully. They offered only legends, echoes from the mouths of their ancestors. They spoke of a king, powerful and wise, who came from the north and built a mighty city. Then, just as suddenly, he left, leaving behind towers and plazas that no one else dared to claim. Palacio had come seeking order and opportunity. Instead, he found questions. He never reached the heights he imagined. He did not become governor of the Philippines, nor did he command fleets across oceans. His ambitions faded along the coast of Mexico, where he chased English raiders and earned little but obscurity. The letter he sent to the king, if it was read at all, became just another page in a thick archive. But the city remained. Its stone faces still stared skyward. Its halls, overgrown with time, held the weight of a forgotten world. What Palacio could not know was that he had wandered into the heart of something far older than he imagined. A world that had lived, flourished, and vanished long before his own ships ever reached American shores. He had walked among the ruins of Copan, once a jewel of the Maya, now swallowed by trees and memory. As darkness descended on Europe in the early Middle Ages, its kingdoms fragmented by war, plague, and invaders, another world was thriving on the far side of the Atlantic. While Viking sails crept down icy rivers and Magyars stormed the heart of Christendom, across Central America, vast cities shimmered under the tropical sun. They sprawled across the land, home to tens of thousands, 50,000 here, 60,000 there. Irrigated farms stitched the countryside into an ordered patchwork. Roads stretched between towns, elevated causeways linking great capitals. This was not wilderness, it was a living web of civilization. The Maya had no metal tools, no beasts of burden, no wheels, yet they achieved wonders. They built with mathematics and measured time with astronomical precision. They carved their histories into stone and bark and elegant script recording dynasties, wars, and prophecies. Their temples rose like mountains, crowned with shrines that watched the heavens. They understood the cycles of Venus, the lunar phases, eclipses. Their calendar rivaled any in the ancient world, all of it achieved by human hands. What Palacio glimpsed in the jungle was a fading echo of that greatness. In his time, the Maya lived in small, scattered communities, poor, subdued, and often silent. But they were not the same people who once ruled from Copan, Tikal, or Calakmul. That Maya world had collapsed centuries before, under pressures still debated today: warfare, environmental strain, dynastic turmoil, perhaps all of it. Yet the magnitude of that loss became clearer only with time in recent years. With the advent of LiDAR scanning technology, researchers have peered beneath the forest canopy and discovered what Palacio never could: cities hidden beneath the green, immense and intricate, terraces, plazas, pyramids, entire landscapes shaped by human vision, and far beyond the city walls, signs of farming on a scale once thought impossible. It now seems that the classic Maya civilization may have supported a population in the tens of millions before it crumbled. By the time European ships scraped the coasts of the Yucatan, the Maya were already a people enduring their own aftermath. Disease would finish what war and famine had begun. Smallpox, measles, typhus brought across the ocean by settlers and soldiers would sweep through a population that had never encountered them. No resistance, no immunity. Whole communities vanished in weeks, 90%. That's the estimate now. 9 out of every 10 souls gone, their bloodlines broken, their knowledge scattered. Palacio was right in one thing. The Maya he met in the 1570s were not their ancestors, but he had no way of knowing what had come before, no way to see the scale, the glory, or the devastation. He saw only the bones. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. But in the shadow of the jungles and highlands, the Maya remained. Despite the horrors of conquest, the plagues of Europe, the missions, the fires, the forced conversions, and the endless centuries of silence millions of Maya endured. Today, they form the majority in parts of eastern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, and western Honduras. Not relics, not ghosts, living people. They still speak the old tongue's 28 distinct Mayan languages, each echoing the cadence of kings and astronomers. They still dance the dances handed down from distant ancestors. They recite oral histories that survived not on parchment, but in memory and ritual. They plant by the rhythms of old calendars, worship in churches laced with older gods, and carry within them the heartbeat of a civilization the world once believed lost. But their story wasn't finished. After 5 centuries of survival, only in recent years have they begun to step forward not as subjects of study, but as partners in discovery. Archaeologists now walk the ancient cities with local guides whose grandparents knew the ruins long before foreign boots ever arrived. Together, they are piecing the past back together, because the story of the Maya is still being told. It's not just a tale of ruins swallowed by roots. It's a cast of characters that spans the ages, conquistadors and kings, scholars and shamans, travellers and tyrants. It stretches from colonial scribes to 18th century bartenders who spoke of forgotten cities, from 19th century travellers who wandered through steaming forests, to artists who wept while sketching broken palaces. They came searching for myth, only to stumble upon truth. They found, beneath the vines and legends, a history deeper than they imagined, and at the heart of it all were rulers who once commanded from forest capital cities that glittered before they crumbled. Their descendants still walk those lands. They remember. They survived. The year was 1517. 3 ships, small and weather-beaten, cut through the turquoise waters off Cuba's coast. Their destination was unknown territory, terra incognita marked on maps with little more than suggestion. They were led by Francisco Hernandez de Córdoba, and they sailed not just in search of riches, but of something stranger, whispers of a land with cities made of stone. Their journey would change the world when they reached the Yucatan Peninsula. The Spanish did not find wandering bands or straw huts. Instead, they encountered coastal cities well planned, fortified, alive. The Maya came out to meet them not in awe, but in curiosity and quickly, in resistance. The clash was immediate. Arrows met iron, spears struck armour. For every Spanish shot fired, a volley of obsidian-tipped shafts answered. The invaders were wounded, many killed, driven back to their ships. It was the first time Europeans faced a people in the New World who could match their force, but they would return. In 1519, Hernán Cortés launched his legendary campaign from Cuba to the mainland. With fewer than 600 men, he toppled the mighty Aztec Empire, exploiting local alliances, spreading fear, and most fatally carrying diseases that would decimate the continent. By 1524, Cortés turned south into the Maya heartlands. He encountered fierce resistance. The Maya did not fall like the Aztecs. They did not offer gold cities, nor a single emperor to be captured and displayed. They fought from forests, in ambush. With knowledge of every trail and terrain, they fell back, regrouped, struck again. The Spanish suffered, but the conquest was relentless. Over decades, town by town, battle by battle, missionaries and muskets pushed into the jungle. Cities were burned, temples pulled down, Mayan kings captured, tortured, baptized, executed, entire provinces erased. Still, even as the Spanish declared victory, the Maya endured. They faded from view but not from existence. They retreated into hills, into language, into ritual. The invaders thought they had destroyed a people. They had only scattered the fire. In 1517, 3 ships slipped from the harbour of Cuba, their sails swollen by Caribbean winds, their decks crowded with steel and ambition. At the helm stood Francisco de Córdoba, a wealthy Andalusian hidalgo, and behind him, a crew of hardened men with dreams sharpened by conquest. They were soldiers of fortune, not diplomats. Their mission was clear: explore new lands, seize gold and silver, and capture slaves to feed the growing hunger of the Spanish Empire. By this time, the blueprint was well rehearsed. The Caribbean had already fallen. The Aztec riches were rumoured but not yet real. The Maya coast was their next wager. What they found startled them as their ships crept along the Yucatan shoreline. They saw towers rising above trees, stepped pyramids gleaming in the tropical sun. Cities, real cities. The men expected primitive villages. Instead, they discovered plazas filled with people wearing fine cotton, bearing weapons of obsidian and stone, and speaking languages no interpreter could understand. They disembarked cautiously. At first, exchanges were civil, but curiosity soon turned to hostility. The Spanish opened fire. The Maya answered. Spears flashed. Arrows fell. Men screamed. Blood soaked the sand. For every one Spaniard who fired a musket, dozens of Maya warriors surged from the forests. It was not a skirmish. It was a rout. Cordoba was wounded so many arrowheads piercing his body he was said to resemble a sea urchin. The survivors fled to their ships. Many would die on the return to Cuba. Cordoba himself would not survive the year. But word spread. Cities and gold, resistance, and something else. Something terrifying. The Maya had writing. They had calendars and monuments. They had gods with names the friars could not pronounce, and rites that chilled even hardened soldiers. Blood sacrifices, ball courts where losers might die, temples where kings offered their own flesh to divine powers. This was not a land of innocence, it was a land of power, and the Spanish wanted it. The invasion would not stop. The fire had been lit. The Spanish came prepared for battle, not history. In their minds, the world beyond the sea was a blank slate, a place to be mapped, measured, and claimed. But the Maya had their own maps. Their cities were not forgotten, they were defended. As the Spanish pushed inland, they found resistance like none they had faced. Maya warriors didn't meet them in open fields. They struck from shadows, disappeared into trees, moved without sound. Their knowledge of terrain turned jungle into fortress. And then there was the fire. When cities fell, the conquerors didn't just take, they burned. Codices, hand-painted records of centuries, were tossed into flames. Temples were desecrated, statues smashed, altars replaced with crosses. It wasn't just conquest, it was erasure. But the Maya remembered, in whispers. They passed stories, in glyphs hidden deep within stone. They etched fragments of their truth. Some codices survived 4, to be exact, preserved by miracle and exile. One found in Spain, another in Dresden, one in Paris, one in Madrid. Tiny windows into a lost world. Among the Spanish, a figure emerged who would shape this destruction: Diego de Landa, a friar, zealous in faith, consumed by the need to save souls and purge demons. In 1562, he ordered a mass burning of Maya texts in the town of Mani. He believed he was saving them. Instead, he set history ablaze. Later, he would regret it. He tried to catalogue what he had destroyed. He wrote of Maya language and symbols, attempting to preserve what could no longer be reclaimed. Ironically, his records would help scholars centuries later decode what had been erased. But the damage was done. To the Maya, the fire was not new. Conquest came in waves, but the memory of kings and priests, of astronomers and warriors, refused to die. They buried their temples beneath earth and foliage. They wove sacred knowledge into dances, into dreams, and in silence. They waited. The fire passed, the ashes cooled, the stone remained. The survivors stumbled back to their ships, torn by spears, pierced by arrows, their bodies broken by an enemy they had not expected. Francisco de Cordoba was among them, bleeding from a dozen wounds. his body failing with each swell of the sea. He died before reaching Cuba, whispering of gold and gods in his final breaths. But the fire was lit. The stories he carried home of golden trinkets, of strange cities, of warriors in feathered headdresses spread like wildfire. They did not warn others away. They summoned them. In 1518, a new expedition took form. Larger, better armed, more determined. This one was led by Juan de Grijalva, nephew to the governor of Cuba, and soon to be rival of Hernán Cortés, unlike Córdoba. Grijalva did not underestimate the land. He brought interpreters 2 Maya-speaking captives taken in previous skirmishes, and he came not only with soldiers, but with the intent to trade, to negotiate, and if need be, to conquer. One of his companions, Bernal Díaz del Castillo, recorded what they saw: island settlements of stone and wood, bustling marketplaces, rulers carried in litters, and a people who did not yield easily. Grijalva landed first on Cozumel, then pressed to the mainland. Everywhere he went, he saw the signs, temples crowned with smoke, idols painted in blood, and warriors watching from the tree line. The Maya did not attack immediately. They waited, measured, assessed. In one village, the Spanish were welcomed. In the next, ambushed. Gold changed hands, small trinkets, ornate earrings, masks shaped like jaguars and serpents. But it was never enough. Grijalva reported back that wealth existed inland, in abundance, somewhere. There was an empire, somewhere. A king whose power dwarfed anything they had yet seen. This would be the seed that bore fruit in 1519 when Hernán Cortés launched his campaign, one that would lead not just into Maya territory, but to the gates of the Aztec capital. But before that conquest, there were these first encounters: raw, violent, uncertain, clashes in surf and sand, words spoken and misunderstood, bows drawn, muskets fired, blood staining both shores. The Maya saw these men not as gods, but as invaders, and they would fight them, again and again, for over 170 years, among the 3 great civilizations of the New World. It was the Maya who resisted the longest and suffered the most prolonged war, unlike the Aztec or the Inca, whose defeats came swift and catastrophic. The Maya endured wave after wave of invasion, and with each wave came men more brutal than the last. The Spanish campaign in the Yucatan was not led by kings or generals. It was waged by adventurous warlords in all but name, driven by greed, pride, and an unshakable faith in their divine right to rule. Francisco de Montejo was one of the first. His son, known as El Mozo, the lad, would become infamous. Together, they carved a path of destruction across the peninsula, establishing cities over ruins, building churches atop temples, and enslaving the people who once called these lands home. But it was not enough to win. They wanted obedience. They demanded erasure. To that end, El Mozo unleashed his most feared lieutenant, Gaspar Pacheco. Pacheco was a man moulded by fire. His methods were not of war, but of terror. Villages that resisted were razed, their leaders tortured, their women taken, mutilated, burned. Those who fled were hunted by war dogs, trained to kill without command. He did not spare beauty. In fact, it was targeted. Young women, we're told, were singled out trophies in a campaign that blurred the line between conquest and massacre. Men were hanged in public squares, children taken as servants or worse, entire provinces reduced to silence. This was not the work of an empire. It was the fury of men who believed they were gods. Still, the Maya resisted. They adapted, learning the patterns of their enemies, fading into forests and mountains. They used the terrain as shield and blade. Some cities fell, but others simply vanished abandoned before they could be taken, left to rot beneath vines and time. To the Spanish, it was a slow, agonizing campaign. To the Maya, it was survival. Each burned village became a vow, each fallen elder, a reason to endure, and in the depths of the jungle, in whispered prayers and secret rites, they waited for the day the invaders would grow tired, turn back, and forget. But that day never came. In 1839, deep in the Guatemalan jungle, an American diplomat stepped off his mule and into history. John Lloyd Stevens was not like the others who came before. He carried no sword, commanded no battalion. He came under the banner of the United States, sent on a diplomatic mission, but that was only the surface. What brought him here was obsession. The region was in turmoil, civil war rippled across Central America following the collapse of Spanish rule. Diplomats before him had perished. Bandits prowled the roads. The ground itself was a quagmire of mud, insects, and fever, malaria. Still a mystery, clawed at travellers without mercy. But Stevens pressed on. At his side rode Frederick Catherwood, a British artist of extraordinary discipline. Together, they had wandered through the ruins of Egypt, the bazaars of Istanbul, and the temples of Jerusalem. But none of those journeys would match what awaited them in the Maya lands. Their destination was not marked on any reliable map. It had no guideposts. It was whispered about in markets and described in rumours scrawled on the margins of forgotten books. Some spoke of ancient towers, others of monsters and idols. What Stevens sought was truth. When they reached Copan, hidden beneath vines and centuries of silence, they stood in awe. Broken stone figures lay scattered like bones. Stepped pyramids loomed beneath the moss. Altars and columns lay half buried in the soil. But this was no myth, it was real. Stevens recorded every detail in ink, his pen capturing wonder, disbelief, and reverence. Catherwood, with a steady hand, began to sketch, not fanciful interpretations, but precise, measured drawings. He rendered what he saw with an engineer's eye and an artist's soul. Together, they documented a civilization that the world had forgotten. Stevens' book, Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan, became an instant sensation. It shattered assumptions. People in New York and London stared at the prints in disbelief. The Maya were not fables. They were architects, mathematicians, astronomers, and their story was not yet over. For the first time in centuries, the Western world was listening. But the jungle kept its secrets close, and Stevens and Catherwood were only beginning to peel back the veil from the moment they laid eyes on Copan. Stevens and Catherwood knew what they were seeing, but others refused to believe. Back in Havana, and across the scholarly circles of Europe and the Americas, theories had already taken root. Surely, they said, the ruins were not the work of the so-called savages of the New World. Perhaps Jews fleeing Rome, perhaps lost Egyptians, maybe even Greeks who had crossed the Atlantic by miracle or misadventure. Anything, it seemed, but the truth. To those minds, it was inconceivable that Native Americans had built pyramids, carved gods into stone, aligned temples to the stars, or developed writing as sophisticated as any in Europe. But Stevens and Catherwood had walked those cities, had camped beneath their crumbling gates, had traced the lines of glyphs with their fingers. They knew better. No outsider could have done this. No lost tribe from the Mediterranean could have crossed an ocean and raised such structures. These buildings, these glyphs, these gods, they belonged to the people of the land, to the Maya. The proof was everywhere. In the materials used local limestone, cut with obsidian tools, in the stylistic continuity art that evolved, generation after generation, in the myth still whispered among the local people, echoes of kings long past, still honoured in hidden rituals, and most of all, in the scale. Cities like Palenque, Yaxchilan, and Tikal were not outposts. They were capitals of kingdoms, each one with royal courts, astronomers, scribes, farmers, builders, and armies. They were not the remnants of a lost civilization imported from afar. They were Maya, Stevens, in his writings. refused the fantasy. He called it what it was, prejudice cloaked as speculation, and Catherwood's illustrations made it undeniable. When people saw his prints, the intricate details, the weathered majesty they could no longer pretend, the Maya had built a civilization that rivaled anything Europe had achieved. The world began to change its mind, but only just for centuries. The ruins of the Maya world were wrapped in fog not only of jungle, but of imagination, as soon as the ancient cities were rediscovered. The Western mind began to fill in the blanks, not with truth, but with fantasy. Some claim the Maya were descended from Egyptians, those same Nile-bound architects who raised the pyramids of Giza. Others said they were lost Israelites, wandering from biblical lands and building temples in exile. Still others conjured tales of Greeks or Romans blown far off course. Few could accept the simplest truth that the Maya were indigenous, and their civilization wholly their own. Even as late as the 1770s, Spanish officials like Antonio Bernasconi sketched Maya nobility not as they were, but as they wanted them to be Europeanized, draped in breeches and powdered wigs. These distortions weren't innocent. They were intentional, crafted to diminish the Maya by elevating foreign ghosts in their place. In 1787, Antonio del Rio, sent by royal decree to investigate the ruins of Palenque, decided within days that the builders must have been Greco-Roman. He took chisels to the walls, pried off panels for shipment to Spain, and left destruction in his wake. His writings, published later, gave breath to absurd theories that would linger for generations. And as Stevens and Catherwood set out on their journey in 1839, a rival expedition was already underway. This one came from British Honduras, led by colonial captains Walker and Caddy. The team hacked their way through jungle and disease. One of their number died from malaria before reaching the site, but when they arrived at Palenque, they too found ruins beyond imagination. Yet even in death and discovery, they failed to see what was before them. They too leaned on old stories, searching for Asia in stone carvings, Rome in crumbling staircases. They missed what was in plain sight. The glyphs were Maya. The gods were Maya. The ruins were Maya. It would take decades, centuries for that truth to fully take root. But the tide had begun to turn. The Maya were no longer legend. They were civilization. In 1511, a storm brewed in the Caribbean, not of wind and wave, but of fate. A caravel, sleek and swift, sliced through the waters off Jamaica. Aboard stood Captain Juan Hernandez de Valdivia, fresh from the conquest of Panama. His destination was Hispaniola, his purpose to deliver complaints, accusations, and gold, 10,000 crowns of it. But the sea had other plans. The ship struck a reef, an uncharted dagger of coral. It cracked like a bone, sending timbers and treasure into the depths. In the chaos, cries were swallowed by the ocean. Most aboard perished. 18 survived. 16 men, 2 women, aboard a lifeboat with no sail, no compass, no food, no water. They drifted. Days passed. Skin blistered, lips cracked. Salt encrusted their eyes. Death took one, then another. The survivors tossed bodies overboard, whispering prayers into a sky that never answered. Unbeknownst to them, the current was carrying them west, not towards salvation, but into the jaws of a new world. Weeks later, the boat scraped against a beach. They had reached the Yucatan coast. They collapsed onto the sand, weak, delirious. They were not alone. Maya warriors emerged from the tree-line, faces painted, spears drawn. The Spaniards could not flee. They could barely stand. For the Maya, these pale, ragged strangers were not gods, so they were intruders. The survivors were seized. Most were sacrificed, hearts torn. Blood spilled in rites older than Europe itself. But 2 were spared. Gonzalo Guerrero and Jerónimo de Aguilar. They would live, but not as they once were. One would cling to his faith. The other would embrace his captors and be transformed. This was no ordinary shipwreck. It was the spark of something far greater. the first permanent European footsteps on Maya soil, and nothing would ever be the same again. Of the 18 who washed ashore in 1511, only 2 would live. Their names were Geronimo de Aguilar and Gonzalo Guerrero. One would become a priest, the other a warrior. Aguilar, a man of God, held fast to his faith, though taken captive. He refused to eat the sacred food, refused to bow to idols. He survived on scraps, endured slavery, and prayed year after year, 8 in total. Then, in 1519, the world changed again. Hernán Cortés arrived on the Yucatan coast, hungry for conquest. He sent word inland, hoping for allies, translators any advantage. A message reached Aguilar. He escaped, found the Spanish. They barely recognized him. His skin was burned, his clothes long rotted. He spoke halting Spanish, as if waking from a dream. But Cortés saw the value in him. Aguilar could speak Maya. He could interpret, bridge 2 worlds. He would become vital in the conquest of Mexico. But Guerrero chose another path, a soldier of fortune by birth. Guerrero embraced his captors. He earned their trust, proved himself in battle, won favor with a Maya lord, and rose first as a warrior, then as a leader. He married a Maya woman, had children, painted his face, tattooed his skin. He no longer looked like a Spaniard. He no longer was. When Cortés tried to summon him, Guerrero refused. "I am married here," he said. "I have children. I am a captain in times of war." His loyalties had changed. He would fight not for Spain, but against it. In the late 1520s, Guerrero misled Spanish envoys, deliberately delaying their advance with false reports. By 1535, he was commanding Maya forces in open resistance, a battle-weary man now, scarred and painted, riding into combat as one of them. His body was found that same year, broken, surrounded by his comrades. He had died not as a Spaniard, but as a Maya. 2 men. One helped conquer an empire. The other died trying to protect it. The conquistadors brought steel and fire, but they also brought something subtler, something harder to extinguish. A story. The story of a man nailed to a cross, who bled for the sins of the world, a God who suffered, who died, and who rose. To the Maya. This story was not unfamiliar. They had their own gods of sacrifice, their own tales of blood spilled to nourish the earth and feed the sun. Their kings had pierced their flesh to commune with the divine. Their priests had opened chests, torn beating hearts from bodies, and offered them skyward. When the missionaries arrived, clutching their crucifixes, they found a people who already understood the language of suffering. The Maya saw in Christ not a stranger, but a mirror. Here was a God who bled. Here was a man who died for something greater. And so, the faith spread not because it erased the old ways, but because it echoed them. Churches rose atop temples, psalms replaced chants, but beneath the altar, the drums still beat. Some villages combined the rites. Sacrifices were offered to Christ and the older gods in tandem. Young girls were nailed to crosses. Blood flowed in ceremonies that fused the holy with the ancient. Death was not an end, it was a bridge. Christianity took root in the Yucatan not by force alone, but through familiarity. The concept of martyrdom, dying for one's God, resonated deeply. Saints were venerated like ancestral spirits. The Passion of Christ was retold in ways that blurred the lines between mythologies. It was not Christianity as Rome knew it. It was something new, a fusion, a survival, a transformation. The old gods were never fully driven out. They simply changed names. They came in the summer. Under the banner of God and empire, they brought fire not to warm but to burn. Inquisition was their creed, and Diego de Landa was their hammer. He was a friar, but not of peace. In 1562, in the town of Mani, de Landa presided over one of the most horrific purges in colonial history. The Maya, he believed, had backslid into idolatry, clinging to gods behind closed doors, hiding rituals beneath crosses. He would root it out, all of it. It began with whispers, then accusations. Soon, men were dragged from their homes, noblemen, priests, artisans. They were tied to posts, their arms twisted, their ribs cracked beneath the garrote. The strappado tore shoulders from sockets. Flames licked their feet. Bodies bloated, bled, screamed, and still the friars demanded more. One by one, the confessions came not in truth but in agony. A high-ranking leader, Juan Cocom, endured torture until he admitted to owning 3 idols. It wasn't enough. They broke him again until he confessed to 20. Still not enough. More screams, more blood. Finally, he admitted to 29 sacred figures. Then, they let him breathe. But his agony was not unique. Across the town, others cracked. De Landa recorded the hall in triumphant tones 13 great altar stones, 22 smaller effigies, 197 intricately painted vases, and most damning of all, 27 sacred manuscripts, painted on deerskin. Books that had survived wars, conquest, exile, books that held the voice of the gods. He burned them all in a single fire. 1,000 years of knowledge turned to ash. Ritual calendars, dynastic histories, poems to the stars all gone. It was not just destruction. It was silence made absolute. The Maya stood and watched as the flames consumed the memories of their ancestors. And in the smoke, something in them changed. They buried their stories deeper, wrapped them in riddles, hid them in stone. De Landa would later regret the act. He would try to rebuild the alphabet, to reconstruct what he had erased, but the damage had been done. The fire he lit would burn for centuries. The stones stood alone for centuries, buried in jungle, silent, shrouded in moss and time. Their surfaces were carved with strange, looping symbols, rows of faces, glyphs, gods. Their meaning lost, their voice silenced. And yet, the question remained. Who would read them? John Lloyd Stephens asked that question aloud in the 1840s, standing before a stela at Copan. He wrote, "Who shall read them?" And beneath that question was a deeper ache. These were not savage marks. They were elegant, intentional. They meant something, but no one knew what. At the time, most dismissed the glyphs as decorative, flourishes, perhaps abstract symbols of gods and time. They believed the language was gone forever, destroyed by fire and conquest. They were wrong. As the 20th century unfolded, a revolution began. Linguists, archaeologists, cryptographers, even children, yes. Children would become part of a great decipherment, and at its root, the writings of Diego de Landa, the same man who had burned 27 sacred Maya books. In his later years, haunted by regret, de Landa tried to catalogue what he had destroyed. He interviewed Maya scribes, asked them how the glyphs worked. He recorded what he thought was an alphabet, a key to the code. He misunderstood much, but he preserved enough, centuries later. Scholars would revisit his writings. They realized the Maya script wasn't purely alphabetical. It was a complex system of syllables, ideograms, and phonetic clues. It was not a cipher. It was a language. One name would change everything. Yuri Norozov, a Soviet scholar working behind the Iron Curtain. Norozov used de Landa's alphabet, combined it with modern linguistics, and cracked the first major breakthrough. He proved the glyphs were phonetic, not symbolic alone, that they told stories, names, dates, deeds. The stones could speak again. They told of kings and queens, of wars and alliances, of births and deaths, lineages stretching back 1,000 years. The Maya had written their history. We just hadn't known how to read it. Until now, by the early 20th century, the jungles of Guatemala lay quiet. The great Maya cities, once teeming with life, were now swallowed by vines. Their temples crumbled, their plazas silent, their glyphs still unread, but the silence was about to break. In the 1930s, a young scholar of Russian descent stood on the banks of the Usumacinta River. Crocodiles stirred in the shallows, howler monkeys screamed from the trees, and the ruins of Piedras Negra, once a mighty Maya kingdom, rose like broken teeth from the earth. Her name was Tatiana Proskuriakov. She wasn't an archaeologist by training. She was an architect. But what she saw in the carved stone slabs steely sparked a revelation. These weren't just religious symbols or abstract patterns. They were history. She noticed patterns, repetitions, sequences, dates. Some glyphs always appeared near depictions of kings, others near battles. She hypothesized that the Maya had recorded real events, the lives and deeds of rulers. It was a radical idea. Until then, most scholars believed the glyphs were purely ceremonial myths and cosmology. But Proskuriakov insisted these were chronicles, and she was right. Her theory was later confirmed and expanded by others, most notably Heinrich Berlin, who in 1958 identified a specific group of glyphs that mark the names of city-states and their rulers. He called them emblem glyphs. Each city had its own, and suddenly, the Maya world became a map of alliances, rivalries, dynasties. The inscriptions, once thought to be frozen in abstraction, became alive with politics, betrayal, war, triumph, and loss. The Maya had a voice, and it had been carved in stone all along. Tatiana's work laid the foundation for modern Maya epigraphy. Without her vision, without her courage to challenge the orthodoxy, the past might have remained a mystery. She gave the Maya their history back, and in doing so, changed ours. The machete struck stone in the sweltering jungles of Mexico's Gulf Coast. A team of workers unearthed something massive. At first, it seemed like a boulder, but as they cleared away the soil and vines, a face emerged broad, with thick lips, a flat nose, and eyes that stared through time. It was a head, a colossal head, perfectly carved, impossibly heavy. It didn't belong to the Maya, or the Aztec, or any known empire. It belonged to someone else. The Olmec, long before Tikal, before Palenque, before the stepped pyramids of Chichen Itza. There were the Olmec, a civilization so ancient that even the Maya would look back on them as ancestors. And for centuries they were forgotten, buried under millennia of soil and silence. The Olmec left behind no readable script, no direct descendants to tell their story. Not even their name survived. Olmec, meaning rubber people, was a label given by the Aztec, speaking of trade with the ghost of a culture already lost. But they were real. They flourished along the Gulf Coast around modern-day Veracruz and Tabasco, building cities of stone and ritual. They carved colossal heads, weighing up to 40 tons, and moved them without wheels. They developed intricate calendars, ceremonial centers, and possibly the first writing in Mesoamerica. The Olmec were not just ancestors. They were origin. For decades, archaeologists debated their role. Some believed they were the Mesoamerican mother culture, the seed from which all others, including the Maya, would grow. Others claimed they were simply the first in a chain of evolving societies. But one fact remains unshakable: they came first, and their influence echoes in the jaguar gods of the Maya, in the calendar systems of the Zapotec, in the blood rituals that flowed from pyramids across Mesoamerica. The Olmec lit the fire, and though the jungle tried to reclaim them, the stone remembered. It began in silence, in the forests of northern Guatemala, beneath the thick canopy and mist. Something ancient stirred. Not cities, not yet, but the first signs, the first sparks of what would become the Maya world. It was the end of the second millennium BCE. In those days, scattered villages dotted the lowlands. They traded obsidian and jade, shared myths, exchanged ideas. The Olmec still flourished to the north, but here, something different was taking shape. At Nakbe, at El Mirador, at Cival, they did not build small. They built pyramids tall, steep-sided structures that pierced the sky. Freestanding monuments rose from the jungle, aligned to the stars, not mere homes for gods. but statements. Proof of power, of order, of ambition. These were not hunter-gatherers with stone tools. They were architects of ritual, and though their language is lost, their intentions are carved in stone. They built in limestone. They worked with stucco. They painted their gods in red and black. Faces emerged from walls. Serpents coiled in plaster. Thrones rose above plazas where rulers declared divine descent. They developed calendars, understood time as a wheel. They watched Venus rise and fall. They tracked eclipses. They lived by cycles of sun, moon, death, and rebirth. And perhaps, even then, they wrote. Debates still rage. Did these earliest Maya write words or only symbols? Were their carvings the ancestors of a true script or merely shadows? But even without certainty, the message is clear. They were not imitators. They were innovators. The style that emerged would become unmistakably Maya bold, mathematical, theatrical. Over the centuries, it would evolve, spread, transform. But its roots ran deep, buried in the early days of Nakbe and Mirador. This was not the classic Maya yet, but it was coming. The world was awakening. Before skyscrapers, before traffic, before the hum of modern life, there was Caminaljuyu, nestled in the highlands of what is now Guatemala City. It was once the beating heart of the southern Maya world. Between 400 and 100 BCE, it rose from the earth an expanse of plazas, irrigation canals, adobe platforms, and sacred tombs. Caminaljuyu was not carved from jungle stone. It was shaped from mud and plaster, built upon layers of volcanic soil, nourished by rivers that no longer flow. Its temples didn't scrape the sky like those in the lowlands, but they were just as sacred. And it thrived at its height. Caminaljuyu controlled trade routes that stretched across Mesoamerica. Jade from the Motagua River, obsidian from volcanic craters, salt, cocoa, symbols of power and wealth. These were not mere goods, they were ritual offerings, buried with kings, carved into gods. Priests walked its platforms, rulers sat on its thrones. The dead were buried with reverence, in tombs lined with treasures. Faces of rulers stared out from stelae, their names long forgotten, their deeds etched in glyphs lost to time. Then came the forgetting. As centuries passed, Caminaljuyu faded. The jungle didn't reclaim it, but people did. Farmers, settlers, colonists. The city became a hill. The hill became a neighbourhood, and eventually the city swallowed it whole. Today, only fragments remain, mounds hidden in schoolyards, parks, parking lots. The rest has vanished beneath concrete and commerce. It is one of the greatest archaeological tragedies of the New World. What was once the largest highland Maya city, larger than many remembered capitals, is now a whisper beneath Guatemala's capital. Bulldozers replaced excavation. Apartments replaced temples. But the earth remembers, and in the few protected plots that remain, the past still breathes, waiting for someone to listen. The jungle whispered no tales of it. No local myths, no whispered names. It had been erased. Not just from history, but from memory. In 1848, deep in the heart of the Petén, Colonel Modesto Mendez, magistrate of Flores, and his companion, Ambrosio Tut, embarked on an expedition. The land was inhospitable, dense, humid, swarming with insects and silence. Flores itself was a lone island of civility, surrounded by endless green. They didn't know what they were searching for, but what they found changed everything. In the stillness of the forest, through the shadows of saber trees, a city emerged, not ruins, but remnants of power. Temples taller than treetops, pyramids swallowed by vines, plazas wide enough to hold armies, steep staircases leading nowhere and everywhere. They had rediscovered Tikal, unlike Copan or Palenque. There were no legends clinging to this place. It had been abandoned, forgotten even by the Maya descendants who lived nearby. The forest had claimed it so completely that its name had faded from all memory. But it had not died. Tikal was immense, more than any site before or since. It bore the mark of ambition. Its elites carved their pride into stone temples aligned with celestial events, stelae that glorified dynasties, altars raised to deified kings. Here was not just a city, here was an empire. Over the next century, explorers, looters, and archaeologists would descend upon it. They would uncover 6 great pyramids, more than 3,000 structures, and inscriptions that spanned 800 years. The city's population may have once reached 100,000, rivaling the greatest cities of the ancient world. Tikal became the symbol of Maya greatness, of their rise, of their complexity, of their reach. But at the time of its rediscovery, it was a ghost vast, voiceless, and waiting. And Tut and Mendes were the first to hear its breath. The great city of El Mirador fell, its pyramids crumbled, its causeways grew quiet, and from that silence power scattered. What followed was not collapse, it was competition, freed from the shadow of a singular empire. New city-states began to rise, each claiming kingship, each staking divine descent. Among them, one city surged ahead. Tikal. In ancient times, it was called Mutul, a name spoken with reverence and fear. Around 100 CE, a new dynasty was founded there, led by a figure cloaked in mystery, Yax-eb-Zook. His origins remain uncertain. Some say he came from the southern highlands, from a city called Kaminal-Juyu. Others claim he was born of the lowland elite, groomed in secret for greatness. But when he appeared in Tikal, he did not build slowly. He declared a new order. The temples began to rise. Stelae marked his lineage. His name, Yax-eb-Zook, meaning first step shark, was carved in stone, the first in a line that would stretch for centuries. Under his descendants, Tikal became unstoppable. Rival cities fell beneath its armies. Trade routes bent toward its markets. The city grew larger, taller, louder. Its rulers styled themselves as divine intermediaries between heaven and earth. Their blood fueled the gods. Their wars reshaped the world. And at the centre of it all, Tikal's great plaza expanded a stage for history. Here, rituals unfolded beneath the watchful eyes of the gods. Here, kings were crowned and enemies executed. Here, the stones whispered allegiance to a dynasty that would one day rival the might of Rome. It was the dawn of the classic period, and Tikal was leading the charge. In the decades that followed Yax-eb-Zook's founding of Tikal's royal line, the city's ambition only grew. And then came Sihyaj Chankawil II. He ruled from 411 to 456 CE, a time of unprecedented expansion. His armies marched far, subjugating cities like Waka, Rio Azul, and even mighty Copan, where the sword could not reach. Diplomacy did sealed-in marriages, bloodlines intertwined like vines around a temple. Tikal was not just a city, it was becoming an empire. Sihyaj Chan's era was marked by echoes from another land, Teotihuacan, the powerful city far to the west in central Mexico. Its warriors wore owl feathers and carried atlatls. Its gods had goggle eyes and fanged masks. And in Tikal, those gods now adorn temples, their symbols, their weapons, their regalia imported, adapted, reimagined. This was no coincidence. Tikal had formed an alliance, military and spiritual, with Teotihuacan. Their influence changed everything: the art, the politics, the religion. But Sihyaj Chan was no puppet. Near the end of his reign, he pivoted. He looked back 3 centuries into the past to the city's founder, Yax-eb-Zook. He invoked that name with reverence. He tied his blood to the ancient dynasty, claiming divine continuity. The Maya were reclaiming themselves, and they left proof. One monument stands as testament, Stela 31, a slab of stone, carved in exquisite detail, unearthed centuries later. It depicts Sihyaj Chan's father speaking, ruling, conquering, and beneath him, the child king Sihyaj Chan, already cloaked in symbols of power. Above all, it tells a story of transition from foreign domination to Maya revival. This was not mere record, it was prophecy carved in stone, and from it, a message. The past is not forgotten, it is reborn. In the north, a new power was rising. Their glyph was a serpent curved, elegant, and dangerous. Their dynasty traced to a man named Skyzer, or perhaps Sky Witness, a name that echoed like thunder across the Maya lowlands. They were the Snake Kings, and they were coming. Their capital shifted over time from Tibanche to Calakmul. Their ambition knew no boundaries. One by one, they forged alliances with Naranjo, with Karakol, with Dos Pilas. Cities fell under their shadow not by siege but by marriage, diplomacy, and whispered promises. While Tikal celebrated its ancient line, the Snake dynasty built a network of control. By the mid-6th century, a storm was brewing. Tikal's western ally Teotihuacan was collapsing. Its support vanished. Its influence eroded. The once mighty partner that had helped Tikal dominate the region now lay in ruin. Overtaken by rebellion and decay, Tikal stood alone, and the Snakes struck. On April 29, 562 CE, armies gathered from Karakol, from Naranjo, from Calakmul itself. At their head rode Sky Witness, the Snake King, and together they unleashed fury on Tikal. The city was sacked, temples were desecrated, steles shattered, kings captured or killed. The great plaza, once the heart of an empire, was silenced. And then came the unthinkable. No new monuments. For over 130 years, the scribes fell silent. The gods were not praised. The names of kings vanished from stone. It was not just a military defeat, it was spiritual decapitation. Tikal had not just lost, it had disappeared. The Snake dynasty rose from the ashes. Their captives were carved into staircases, their symbols etched into temples across the land. At Calakmul, power gathered like thunderclouds. The Maya world now belonged to the serpent. Tikal lay wounded, but not dead. In the world of the Maya, a king could fall, but his dynasty could not. To erase a royal bloodline was to threaten the very order of the cosmos. The gods had chosen the rulers. Their blood was sacred, their names divine. Even in defeat, the Snake Kings knew this. And so, they didn't destroy Tikal outright. They bent it. A vassal king, drawn from the same lineage, was installed. Not a puppet, but not a sovereign either. He would serve Calakmul, swear loyalty, offer tribute, watch his temples crumble and not rebuild them. The monuments stopped. The rituals dimmed. For over a century, Tikal became a whisper of its former self reduced in population. Stripped of prestige, the once mighty city faded beneath the jungle canopy, eclipsed by a new sun. Calakmul rose higher than ever. Its power reached its peak under Yuknum the Great, who ruled from 636 to 686 CE, a master strategist. He forged alliances across the Paten, brought rival cities into his orbit, and led a string of victorious campaigns against Tikal and its remaining allies. Under Yuknum, Calakmul became a superpower, its reach stretching farther than any Maya city before it. Temples soared, dancers twirled, priests bled in honor of snake-wrapped gods. The city buzzed with confidence, its future written in gold and stone. But power invites challenge, and in the shadows of its domination, something stirred. Tikal had been quiet for too long. Beneath the moss and memory, the bones of a new ruler were forming. His name would shake the world at the southern edge of Mexico. The forest thickens dense, tangled, ancient. It was here, amid the silence, that stone reappeared. First, ruined houses, foundations cracked by roots, walls swallowed by moss. Then, higher structures, steps too uniform to be natural. And finally, rising from the treetops, a sight that stole the breath of every man who saw it. Pyramids, grand, towering, alive with carvings. They had found Palenque. The first explorers, rough colonial surveyors and soldiers stood in stunned reverence. These were not crude ruins. These were palaces, temples, complexes of corridors and stairways, arches and vaults. They were the first outsiders to lay eyes on the city in nearly 1,000 years. And Palenque was not shy. Its walls spoke in glyphs, its panels danced with gods and kings, its temples rose in geometric precision, aligned to celestial rhythms. It was a city built not just to endure, but to impress. Yet for all its beauty, Palenque remained hidden. 3 official expeditions were launched between 1784 and 1807. They mapped, they drew, they described, but communication with Europe remained glacial. Spanish colonial conservatism wrapped the region like a shroud. The forests slowed everything, and so the world waited. 200 years passed before modern archaeology returned in full. When it did, Palenque revealed treasures beyond imagination. Buried beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions, archaeologists uncovered a tomb, the first royal burial discovered inside a Maya pyramid. Its walls were painted with jaguars and gods. Its ceiling dripped with stalactites of time. Inside lay Pakal, the great one of the longest ruling kings in Maya history. His face, preserved in a jade death mask, stared up as if waiting. Not for resurrection, but recognition. He came to power at 12, still a child, yet crowned beneath the watchful gaze of ancestors and gods. Pakal the Great took the throne of Palenque and never looked back. His reign would span nearly 70 years. Under Pakal, Palenque reached its zenith. It was a city of diplomacy and domination where scribes etched treaties into stone and armies marched beneath banners of jade. He negotiated with powerhouses like Piedras Negra and Tonina. He built temples not just to worship but to remember. The Temple of the Inscriptions rose like a mountain from the plaza. Beneath it, a crypt. In the crypt, a sarcophagus. And on that stone lid, a map of the cosmos. A king ascending not just to death, but to divinity. Pakal was extraordinary, but he was not alone. He was one link in a chain of dynasties that ruled Maya cities for centuries. These were the ruling houses, elite lineages that passed power through blood, marriage, and ritual. They were more than families. They were institutions. Each house was defined by kinship and ancestry traced through meticulously kept records, divine right descendants of gods, confirmed through blood rituals, material wealth land, jade, tribute, slaves, spiritual capital mythology, prophecy, the calendar itself. Power flowed through them like lifeblood. A single house could rule a city for hundreds of years, and when that city fell, its members often fled, taking their lineage, their scribes, their gods with them. They would rise again, in another city, another form. It wasn't just about who ruled, it was about who remembered. The Maya did not just build temples, they built people in the mirror world of their society. Identity was shaped literally. The elite practiced cranial deformation from infancy, binding the soft skulls of their children to elongate their foreheads. A high brow was not merely aesthetic, it was sacred. It marked the divine. You could see nobility from across a plaza. It was written on their heads, and they dressed the part. Feathers from the quetzal bird, jade inlays in teeth, elaborate headdresses that turned humans into gods. The highborn moved through the city as walking myth, part human, part celestial symbol. But Maya life was not all division. There were moments rare, intense when boundaries dissolved. Festivals, at calendrical intervals, cities erupted in colour and fire. The elite and the commoners gathered in plazas beneath rising incense. Music echoed through the temples, and in the centre, the rulers bled. Bloodletting was sacred. Not battle wounds, but chosen wounds. Rulers pierced their tongues, their ears, their genitals, drawing blood not for pain, but for prophecy. They opened a channel between worlds, a lifeline from human to god. It hurt. That was the point, and all could see. The other arena of shared spectacle, the ball court. Every city had one, sometimes modest, sometimes immense, in Chichen Itza. The court was so vast it seemed impractical, but it wasn't about the game. It was about ritual, about performance, about divine fate played out in rubber and sweat. Poc to Poc was not just the oldest ball game on Earth. It was a story told in motion. Across Mesoamerica, from Arizona to Costa Rica, variations existed, but the Maya played it with cosmological precision. The ball echoed the sun, the hoop, the path of the soul, and sometimes the losers or the winners were sacrificed. The lines between elite and commoner never truly vanished, but for a moment they blurred beneath the chant of drums and the crack of stone. From above, a Maya city reveals itself not in lines but in layers. At the core, the ceremonial center. This was the heart of power pyramids, temples, palaces, plazas, a sacred stage where kings bled, gods descended, and history was carved in limestone. Only the elite lived here, their homes nestled beside ball courts and astronomical observatories. They lived close to the gods, closer still to each other. Radiating outward were the homes of craftspeople, stoneworkers, scribes, potters, weavers. Their skills fed the temples, adorned the palaces, and supplied the markets. They were not nobles, but they were necessary. They lived near the action, and beyond them across roads, through jungle paths, past irrigation canals lived the labourers and farmers. Here, maize was grown, water was hauled, children played in dirt yards. Life was simpler, but not idle. These were the people who fed the city, who built its temples, who carved the very stones that bore the names of kings. They lived on the edge, but without them, nothing stood. Burial sites told similar stories. Elites were interred in tombs beneath temples or inside private shrines surrounded by jade, obsidian, shells, and painted pottery. Commoners were buried near their homes, sometimes with a few offerings, sometimes with none. The difference was material, but not always spiritual. All Maya believed in the cycle of life, death and rebirth. The world was a wheel, time a serpent eating its tail, and each death a doorway, not an ending. Even in class there was shared faith, and so the cities breathed layered with ritual, hierarchy, trade, and memory. Not concrete grids, but cosmic designs. The jungle parted, and the Spaniards arrived. Cortés was tired. His men were thinner, hungrier. Trailing behind them were native allies, horses, pack animals, ghosts of a campaign that had already toppled empires. They had crossed rivers, fought battles, buried friends. Now, they reached a shimmering lake. Lake Ipetenitza. It stretched like a mirror, silent and vast, and on its surface floated a city. Tayasal, built on an island. Tayasal was a jewel stone buildings, stepped temples, narrow causeways, and canoes gliding like shadows. The Maya here had heard rumours of the invaders, but still they welcomed them. Food was shared, words exchanged, but the Spanish wanted more. They wanted allegiance. They saw not a city, but a prize. Cortés did not have enough men to conquer it outright, so he left behind a handful of soldiers, perhaps as ambassadors, perhaps as a warning. One of them was a horse, Murillo, veteran of battles from Veracruz to Tenochtitlan. Murillo had ridden with Cortés through fire and blood, but now he was old. He could go no farther. The Maya, fascinated, cared for him. They built a stable, fed him fruit, treated him like a god, and when he died, they built him a shrine. Murillo became myth. Tayasal endured. For another 170 years, it remained free, the last independent Maya kingdom. While empires fell and priests burned codices, Tayasal stood guarded by water, protected by belief. When the Spanish finally returned in 1697, they brought guns, boats, cannons. The city fell, but for a time, an island resisted the world. While Tayasal's flames still smouldered, another fire burned quiet, sacred, and unextinguished. High in the mountains of southern Guatemala, the Quiche people endured. Their kingdom stretched across valleys and volcanoes. Their traditions ran deep, and unlike the shattered codices of the lowlands, here something survived. A book, the Popol Vuh, written after the conquest but born of memory. It is the most important Maya text to survive the ages, not a history, a genesis, a mythology, a revelation. It begins in darkness. No earth, no sky, no people, only silence. Then came creation, by gods with names like Tepeo and Guchumats, who shaped men from mud, then wood, and finally corn. Corn, the sacred substance of the Maya, the body of the people, their very breath. The Popol Vuh speaks of the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque who travel to the underworld, trick the lords of death, and rise again. Their journey is a mirror of Maya belief death is not an end, it is a test. The Spaniards tried to erase these stories, but the Quiche resisted. In 1524, the conquistador Pedro de Alvarado marched into the highlands. Swords gleaming, he brought war, steel, horses. The Quiche met him with warriors, spears, and ancestral pride. They fought, they fell, but the memory remained. The Popol Vuh was preserved first orally, then copied by native scribes using Latin script, hidden beneath Christian covers, passed hand to hand, heart to heart. It is more than a book. It is the voice of a people. Today, the Quiche number close to 1 million. They still live on the land of their ancestors. They still speak the old tongue, and through them, the Maya creation story lives on unbroken, unforgotten. In a world of ruins, the greatest survival is not stone, it is story. The temples burned, the codices curled in fire, but the Maya found a new way to remember. They turned to their conqueror's script Latin letters and used them to resurrect ancient sound. In secret, by candlelight, beneath church walls, behind closed doors, they wrote. First came the Popol Vuh, a book of beginnings, but it was not alone. Across the Yucatan and the highlands, Maya scribes recorded dreams, prophecies, plays, medicine, calendars, history. They called them the Books of Chilambalam, named for a legendary Jaguar priest whose words guided a people in exile. Each town had its own version, Chumayel, Tizimin, Mani, each book a variation, a voice, a thread in a disappearing tapestry. The tone is urgent, poetic, at times, apocalyptic. They speak of omens, of kings who were gods, of serpents in the sky, of centuries that turn like wheels, of foreign ships bringing sorrow and steel. The Spanish are not named, but they are everywhere in the text, not as victors, as prophecy. And then, from the mountains, came Rabin al-Akhi, a drama, a performance, a war dance, one of the only surviving Maya plays. It tells of a captured warrior, his interrogation, and eventual sacrifice. But beneath the plot lies something more, a memory of diplomacy, of alliance, of blood debt and cosmic justice. It was once staged in plazas. Today, it is still performed, UNESCO recognizing it as a masterpiece of oral heritage. All these works, Popol Vuh, Chilambalam, Rabin al-Akhi survived not in stone, but in whisper, in script borrowed from the invader, in pages hidden in attics and guarded by grandmothers. The Maya may have lost their kingdoms, but they never lost their voice, even when their words were silenced. The Maya spoke in image, and their gods never left. Kawil appears first, his snout upturned, one leg shaped like a serpent. From his forehead erupts a smoking axe or torch. He is fire, lightning, royal blood. He was no mere deity. He was a symbol of kingship itself, adorned on sceptres, etched into regalia, summoned in coronation, like Odin, like Zeus. He didn't walk beside kings. He made them. Then came the sun, Kinichahau radiant, cross-eyed, with T-shaped teeth and curling serpents from his lips. He burned with divine power, and the kings, hungry for eternity, claimed him as their ancestor. They took his name. Kinish became a title, in city after city. The imagery repeated, etched into temples, carved on stele, painted on ceramics. These were not just decorations, they were affirmations of divine rule, of cosmic order, and of myth. Long before the Popol Vuh was whispered in hiding, its stories danced across walls and stone. In El Mirador, a panel from the pre-classic era centuries before Christ shows the hero twins, swimming into the underworld, their mission to retrieve the decapitated head of their father. The image is ancient, raw, powerful. In San Bartolo, murals bloom like resurrection depicting gods, rituals, serpents, maze. One wall captures the world being born, the first humans emerging from the earth, wide-eyed and grateful. At Kansebe, a stela stands silent, chipped and astonishing. It tells the same story, the myth of creation, the triumph of blood and breath. These depictions date to 200 BCE, over 1700 years before the stories were first written down. They are proof that the Maya remembered long before they could record. That myth lived in stone, and gods did not die. To the Maya, breath was sacred. In art, it appears as a scroll from the mouth, sometimes shaped like a flower, sometimes like carved jade. It was more than air. It was life made visible. When breath ceased, life did not. The Maya believed in an afterlife not singular, but layered. A universe composed of levels, some benevolent, others nightmarish. But for some souls, paradise awaited. This was not reserved for saints. It was earned. Rulers who spoke with gods, priests who bled in ritual, warriors who died in battle, women who perished in childbirth, and those who met death by their own hands hanging was considered a pathway to sanctity. They passed into a place of abundance, a realm with no pain, no hunger, no thirst, just shade, fruit, music, and at its heart stood a tree. The sabre, its roots dug deep into the underworld, its branches touched the heavens, it held the cosmos together, sky, earth, and Xibalba intertwined. The sabre was more than a symbol, it was a structure, a bridge between all things. Beneath it the dead found peace, and it was here that the maize god, Hunhunapu, was said to dwell reborn from the earth, rising again and again with the crop that fed a people. Sacrifice to the Maya was not horror, it was transformation, not death, but passage. The Spaniards misunderstood, equating it to martyrdom, to punishment, to pain. But to the Maya, blood was language. It spoke across worlds. It opened the sabre. It led the soul upward. Today, that sacred tree still grows in villages across Mesoamerica, tall, silent, watching. And in its shadow, breath still stirs. The kings ruled, but the shamans listened. In every Maya village, from the grand cities of the lowlands to the thatched hamlets of the highlands, there was one who saw beyond. The shaman, his power did not come from throne or wealth, but from vision, from breath, from blood. He knew the calendar, not just the long count of gods and empires, but the Tzolk'in and the harb, the sacred rhythms of time. He read the sky like scripture, and when the stars shifted, he spoke. Families performed rituals, burned copal, let blood, offered maize. But it was the shaman who interpreted their meaning, who felt the pulse of the cosmos, who knew when to plant, when to bleed, when to chant. He walked between worlds, in the jungle. He collected herbs, in caves. He left offerings. At night, he read fire and smoke when illness struck. It was the shaman who intervened, not just with poultices or prayers, but with dreams. He was a diviner, a healer, a channel. Archaeologists have unearthed effigies, figurines, and masks many depicting the hunched figure of the shaman. Mid-trance, his eyes wide with vision. Some hold serpents, others obsidian mirrors. They were not clergy in the Western sense. They were bridges between the living and the dead, the present and the eternal, the human and the divine. And though they held no armies, no tribute, no palaces, they held time itself. When the rains failed, the people did not look to kings. They looked to him, the one who spoke to the gods. The canoe was long, carved from a single mahogany trunk. It glided across the turquoise shallows of the Yucatan coast, 8 feet wide, tapered like a spear. In its centre, beneath a palm-thatched canopy, sat a merchant. Rich, proud, Maya. He surveyed his cargo carefully wrapped pottery, bolts of dyed cotton, copper bells, obsidian blades, cacao beans tucked into woven pouches. Every piece had purpose, every item value. He was bound for Honduras, perhaps farther to the island of Guanaja. A voyage of weeks. His family sat beside him. Below deck, if such a thing could exist on an open boat, were baskets of maize bread, gruel, and water gourds, and at the very bottom, rowing in practised rhythm, were the slaves. Their backs shone with sweat, their hands calloused and raw. They pulled not for coin, but for survival. The canoe slipped past mangroves and reefs, past pelicans that danced on the water for days. The sea was calm, and then came the shimmer, a glint on the horizon. Not lightning, not bird, but sails tall, billowing, foreign. The sun caught their canvas and turned it into prophecy. The Maya had never seen anything like it. It was a Spanish ship. It cut through the water like a floating citadel, metal-clad men at its helm, their eyes hungry for land, for gold, for souls. The canoe rocked in their wake. For a moment, silence, then motion. The merchant barked orders. The slaves paddled harder. The Spaniard shouted, lowered a small boat, advanced. It was 1517. The world would never be the same. The canoe was captured, the crew taken, some enslaved, others questioned, still others spared, to tell the tale of strangers who came from the sea, of steel and gunpowder, of a sun that no longer rose from the east but from the west, and with it, an empire. The sea glinted, and from the Spanish ship, they saw it perched on a cliff above the turquoise waters, a tower, white and angular, catching the morning sun like a lighthouse of stone. Below it a crowd gathered. Indians, they wrote, raising flags, lowering them, a signal, an invitation, or a warning. The Spanish hesitated. The town was Tulum, in its day. It was a marvel, one of the last Maya cities to thrive before the conquest. Its walls enclosed temples, homes, shrines, and at its centre stood El Castillo, the great watchtower above the sea, both fortress and beacon. It was not an empire's capital. It was a port. Trade had changed everything. The jungle roots had grown quiet. Inland cities like Tikal and Copan faded into moss and silence. But along the coast a new world emerged. Canoes carried cacao, obsidian, salt, cotton, jade, and honey. From Tabasco to Honduras, the sea became a highway, and Tulum was its toll gate. Merchants flowed through its gates. Priests watched the stars from its temples. Fishermen hauled sea turtles and barracuda to market. Artists carved with new symbols shaped by the currents, flavoured by distant lands. Nearby islands, like Jana, bore statues unlike any seen in the central lowlands, figures with wide eyes, open hands, and tilted headdresses. It was a style born of the coast, and yet, for all its dynamism, Tulum was vulnerable, not because of its walls, but because of what loomed beyond them. Spanish sails cutting the horizon, the people raised banners. The Spaniards did not land. Not yet, but the clock had begun. The jungle had teeth. It devoured stone, drank rivers dry, and turned cities to shadow. and the classic Maya, those mighty builders of palaces and pyramids, faced their greatest enemy. Not war, but nature. Deforestation, soil erosion, drought. Crops failed, cisterns cracked, families fled, with little water to drink or food to eat. The once glorious centres Tikal, Kalakmul, Kopan emptied, stone temples stood, echoing sermons to no one. But this was not an apocalypse. It was a migration, as southern lowland cities declined. New powers rose on the margins, in the north, in places once seen as peripheral. Uxmal, Kaba, Sayil, Labna. Together, they formed the Puk tradition, a golden age of architecture, astronomy, and adaptation. The land here was harsh, dry, stingy with rain, but the people adapted. They built chultans, underground cisterns, to capture every drop. They lined them with stucco, filtered rain through gravel. Above, they crafted sweeping friezes of masks, serpents, and lattice work, where every stone told a story. At Uxmal, the pyramid of the magician rose in curves, not steps, its oval base unique in all of Mesoamerica. It faced the nunnery quadrangle, a courtyard so precise that its shadows marked the solstices. This was not decline, it was evolution. While the jungle reclaimed the south, the north innovated. New routes, new styles, new gods. And at the centre of it all, Chichen Itza, soon to become the most powerful Maya city of the Terminal Classic. But that's another story. For now, we stand with Uxmal and watch the light return not from the east, but from the dry stony west. The ships carried swords, but they also carried silence. Not the silence of peace, but of plague. As the Spaniards stepped ashore with armour and crosses, behind them rode something unseen, a killer with no name in the Maya tongue, no glyph, no god. Smallpox, typhus, diphtheria, cholera. They came not with warriors, but with livestock pigs, cows, sheep. Creatures that had lived beside humans in Europe for millennia, breeding immunity, but the Maya had no such history. No resistance, no warning. It began with fever, then rash, then death. When Cortés marched through the wilderness in 1525, his pack animals trailed more than supplies. They trailed extinction. One village sickened, then the next, then the next. The Maya had survived collapse, survived drought, survived civil war, but this was erasure. It's estimated that 90% of the population across the Americas died in the first century after contact. Cities emptied, fields went fallow, rituals ceased, memory broke. For those who lived, the world became unrecognizable. A city of 50,000 became a village of 500. Families vanished. Elders, the keepers of stories, rituals, names were the first to fall. And with them, language, wisdom. God, the jungle grew thicker, but not because the Maya left. Because the Maya died, this was not conquest by steel. This was conquest by breath. A wind that passed unseen through villages, temples, kingdoms, and turned the sky grey. By the time the world had forgotten the Maya, the jungle had not. In the 1940s, a man named Giles Healy, chemist, cartographer, photographer, walked into the Chiapas jungle of southern Mexico. His mission was unusual to make a film. His sponsor, the United Fruit Company. But what he found was more than fruit. He found the Lacandon Maya, a group so isolated that some believed them myth, clad in white robes, hair long and braided. They lived in harmony with the forest. No cities, no steel, no Spanish. But not primitive, just preserved. Over 2 years, Healy earned their trust not through conquest, but with gifts, hunting rifles, ammunition, cloth, food, medicine. In return, the Lacandon guided him, through vine-choked trails, over rivers, into ruins. First to Yaxchilan, its stairways steep, its lintels carved with kings and blood. Then to Bonampak, whose walls whispered in colour, but still the greatest secret lay hidden, until one day the Lacandon relented. They took him deeper, to a place of gods. The jungle opened, the vines peeled back, and there, carved into cliffs, was a city untouched for centuries, frescoes still bright, temples intact. Healy stood in awe. He had found a living myth. The Lacandon still visited these sites, still burned incense, still offered prayers, not as tourists, but as descendants. These were not ruins, they were homes of gods, and in those moments, Healy wasn't a filmmaker, he was a witness to a civilization not lost but living in the breath of the forest.